Greetings and welcome to Office Hours with Dr. G. I'm your host, Dr. G, and I am so glad that you could keep our appointment. Now, tonight I have a very exciting returning guest. Many of you know him, some of you may not. I'm talking about the profound conversation I am about to have with visionary author and metaphysical explorer Richard Smith. He's going to come and talk to us based upon his previous appearance back in 2017, I believe, and 2020. He's returning to share some insights from his latest work, exploring the intersections of science, spirituality, and personal transformation. Specifically, however, he'll delve into the hidden timeline, history, bloodlines, and the age of forgetting. He'll be exploring some suppressed ancestral knowledge and how disconnection from our true origin keeps humanity fragmented. The topics will include, and maybe more than this, the legacy of the Moors and the metaphysical relevance of ancient bloodlines, spiritual warfare through distorted education and broken genealogies, and the alien influence in our developmental history and the control of knowledge. Now,
that's me.
You're going to want to take some notes and get yourself prepared for the information that my guest tonight, Richard, is going to share. And I want to present to some and introduce to others none other than my guest, Richard Smith.
That's me.
Hello.
Hi, Richard.
Hey, how are you tonight? Good to be here.
I'm good. I was trying to talk real slow to kind of like drag it out to get to the end. But, my thing is when the music comes on and it's still playing and I'm finished, let me just rock a little bit.
Great.
That's me.
Yeah.
All right. Welcome, as I said, welcome back to Office Hours with Dr. G. I want to say the first time you were on my show, it was
the Reawakening.
Was it Blog Talk? It was Blog Talk Radio.
Yes.
I had Blog Talk. I was on the High Frequency Radio Network and Blog Talk Radio, and Yusuf L. I was on his network, and that was my first venture out into social media. And it was, nobody saw me, so it didn't matter. But times have changed, and now we are where we are, and it's good to have you back. Good to have you back.
Thank you.
So,
I remember that years ago. That was like right at just a couple of years after coming out with the first book, and so that was 2017 that first time.
Yeah.
And then 2020 was the second time. Yeah. So that's.
Yeah. I think I had just before I actually went off the air because I was injured in 2017.
Oh, I remember that. Yes.
So I had that crazy injury in 2017, and I just kind of gave up and wasn't doing anything, until 2020. So there was about a 3-year hiatus, and then 2020 came on with I guess on YouTube and Facebook. But it's good to have you here. And I was telling you before we went live, I was looking on my shelf. I got so many books, but I was like, can't find book one. But I know that was what was out when we first met. The more the Mason and the alien. Let me tell you all who are listening a little story about how I first came across Richard. I was, on YouTube or something, whatever was out back then, and I came across this, quote unquote white guy lecturing I think you were at maybe Temple University, but there was
Yeah.
this viral video of you, and you were pretty much, talking about the Moors and the legacy and all of this stuff. And I was like, oh my goodness, a lot of people were fascinated by you because of the things that you were saying, that a lot of, people like Ranshik Tashtarik Bey and others have been saying all along, but sometimes it didn't, probably strike a chord with as many until they heard you say it. And then it was like, wait a minute, So that's when I want to say that was when was that you were at Temple?
That was about spring of 2008 or 2007. No, 2007. I think.
So it was a 2007 lecture you were given, and I didn't wake up and start waking up until 2011, and into 10 to begin 11. So by the time I came across that video, it had gone around the world a couple of times, but it was about 2012, I believe, when I discovered you. And I don't know how I connected with you, but I do know this about me, that when I see someone and I want to make, and I'm, if I'm impressed or I have this feel a connection, there's always, I find a way to connect with them. And that's what happened. I think somewhere along the line, when I heard you, I was like, I got to talk to that guy. I have to talk to him. So it was 2017 when you actually came on the Blog Talk Radio show. So I thank you for, even agreeing to come. And that's the first time yeah. Okay. Yeah. Somebody else was saying something. So look, tell us a little bit about you. Let's go back, because we had this conversation probably on my first show when we were on Blog Talk Radio, and you kind of asked, how does a guy like you, I don't know whether you were calling yourself a wasp or whatever, but anywho, come into the knowledge and start talking this, they say, the Shiite, that you were talking boldly, not just that was bolstering and supporting what the Moors are saying, but to the fact that many people may from your own ethnicity might think, well, wait a minute, what's this guy doing? So give us the background of Richard Smith and how you came to where you are today.
It's and thank you. So I guess there's a couple ways we could jump into that, but basically, for people who have never met me and don't know me, I had my first awakening at the age of 21, and and that was 1991, and that's when an extraterrestrial being that I describe in the books, and I actually do describe her as the Crone. I've also referred to her as Mother in some cases too, but mostly the Crone. And she's a female praying mantis. Turns out, when that first awakening came at the age of 21, there were a lot of questions answered at that point about myself and my family, and this thing being multi-generational, and it was always there. And she was always there on the backdrop ever since I was 4 years old. I mean, she was always there before that, but I always knew as a kid there was this obscure entity hiding in the background somewhere with these strange, bizarre experiences I was having, until I reached the age of 21 and everything came to the surface. And then she said, this is who I am. Because the first thing, when I saw her, the first thing I said was, I know you, but how do I know you? Because I couldn't believe she was standing right there, but somehow that was familiar. So that started from that point forward, what I refer to as the conversation. Since then, it started when I was in college. So at that point, I devoted my first series of artwork to that whole subject matter of alien contact and how it relates to social, political, and economic topics, which was basically taking it into an arena that most of the people probably couldn't fathom at the time, because they were probably too busy still being, dazzled by the silver ships in the sky, instead of looking at it from the perspective of how does that profane topic relate to your mundane existence. And so I set out to show people how your weekly paycheck exists in the same reality with that UFO, and here's the reasons why. And that's what started leading me down the path of talking about how what happened in ancient history does not stay in ancient history. You know, they say what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Well, it's not the same here. What happens in ancient history spills out into the modern day. And this is where I learned in those conversations with the Crone how we have this severe disconnect with our past. And because of it, we've been fed the idea that, you know, our ego kicks in and we think, well, we know better today. Those dumb ancients didn't know anything. And yet all the evidence that's coming to serve the service is now showing us that we've all been wrong. Especially in the academic science field, you know, because the idea is there's no way they could have astrophysics or mathematics or anything. Well, yes, they did. They had all of that. And the proof is there. The evidence is there when you start looking for it in the strata rock of the earth. Why is there a capacitor or a diode or a transistor or a circuit board next to a fossil of one of our prehistoric ancestors? Where did that come from? How is that there? Did something crash land here? You know, of course, that happened many times over, which is how the ancient astronaut theory started coming to the surface. The Crone at that point, in that first awakening, she asked me, would you be a voice for those that have no voice? Use your artwork. That's where it started. That's why she came to me, because she knew I had just started college at that point, focusing on my art. And there was the topic. You have to have things approved by your well-established professors before you can move forward on anything like that. And so you can imagine what it was like. I had to stand before a panel of my professors and explain this to them. And I'm sure at that time, you can imagine the looks I got. But there was one professor who became my mentor. He saw the side I was approaching, the political side, and he saw through to that. And he said, okay, do this. He says, I'll back you all the way. He says, I just don't want to see any airy-fairy garbage in there. Make it serious, make it down to earth, make it something that will grab the viewer when they look at your artwork. And when you look at the artwork from that time that I did, that's exactly what I set out to do. Make it interactive with the viewers so that they're not just looking at a picture, but they're looking at something that draws them into the experience. As time went on, that artwork, through an experience I talk about in the book, ended up turning into the first book, the prelude to the trilogy, Legions of Light, Armies of Darkness. And then from there, there was a bit of a span of 10 years. In that time, I was doing a lot of speaking. And then I sat down to target the trilogy, The More Than Mason and Alien. I had it actually planned out in my head all the way through as to how I wanted it to unfold. I just had to get it done. And of course, you know, we all have human lives. Life gets in the way. So it took the span of 10 years to get the trilogy done, from 2015 to last year, 2024, when I put out part 3. But it was one heck of an odyssey to go through, because at the time I'm writing each book, I'm also including current events into the books as we move along, as well as historical context in the ancient past. So it's an interesting growth when you read part 1, 2, and 3 as to what it was fanning out into by the time it reaches part 3. But all the while, this entity I described as the Crone is this female praying mantis type alien. She had always been there with my family. That's why my wife and I, Linda and I, we are third generation experiencers. I know, you know, our mothers were involved with it. We have very strong suspicions about our grandmothers. And of course, in the next generation of my family, her children, our kids, they became part of it with the experiences they were having. My brother, he has 4 girls, my nieces, and they started exhibiting certain things that were coming out of left field that, I was like, how would you even know about that? So in that dialogue with the Crone, I found out about what she belongs to. She's part of what's called the Sisterhood, or the Sisters of Mercy, which are basically the midwives between the galactic community and the gifted children of this world. In the old world, they were called Christ children, or, the Christ. Nowadays, we use different names like indigos, super psychic kids,
Starseed.
star seeds, hybrids. We use those terms now. And I'll even include autism into that too, because the more information that comes to the surface about autism, the more I realize that and we can talk more about this later if you want, but as we get closer to imminent official first contact, it'll be the autistics, people who are autistic, who know how to communicate with them in ways that a normal neurotypical person will have a lot of difficulty with accepting. It's just the way the neurodivergent mind works in a little bit of a different way to be interacting with the world in such a sensitive way, with such a heightened level of communication, that it's my feeling that the reason we have a neurodivergent population within a neurotypical population is so that there is a line of communication with these extraterrestrial beings when the time comes.
Let me ask you
Yeah.
this before
Go
you go
ahead.
further. How was your communication with the Crone? Was it telepathic?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was at times it was mostly telepathic. And actually, it was all telepathic. Me, at times it was telepathic, but I would also just talk to her like we are now. And that would be fine with her. She is anywhere from 9 to 12 feet tall, depending on what perspective you're looking at her from. She wears a rather mysterious dark brown robe, hooded robe. At times, it seems like it floats across the floor. I have, on rare occasions, seen her in full body form, but for the most part, she's covered by the robe, so you see her hands and her head most of the time. She has large obsidian black eyes, so there's that shimmer of rainbow in the black. Okay, and she is part of, or from, a very ancient primordial race. There's not too many of them left out there, but they're out there, and they're so old. They're like built into the fabric of the universe at this point. So she has those mystical qualities about her too. When she started having that relationship, turns out she was having that relationship with my wife too when she was growing up. So, and when the first time Linda and I met here in this reality was the night of all things, the night I had my opening reception for my art show. I was basically showing my whole body of work I had done on that subject. And she ended up coming to the opening reception. That's how we met. We shook hands. It was like there was a spark there, like we knew each other somehow. And then it just blossomed from there. As time went on, we became good friends, and we started comparing notes and realizing we were there with each other on the craft as children and adolescents and young adults all along. And it was the Crone and the sisterhood that had been there with us the whole time. So they like to, the sisterhood, they are a multi-genotype collective, many different species, human as well. You'll see some men or male figures in there too, but mostly it's female. A lot of it has to do with the vril power, the female principle, and the feminine goddess energy. But they will protect, they are there to protect the gifted children that are born into this world so that they don't get attacked by, let's say, bad actors on the opposing team who would like to get their hands on them and use them in a different way. Things like the Manchurian Candidate or something absurd like that. So I often would tell people the story about how Jesus and his parents, Mary and Joseph, were protected that same way. It's just back then it was a mystic, a swift angel by the name of Angel Gabriel, which was just a master teacher who had longevity like you wouldn't believe. And he was part of that same ilk, and the job was to protect the gifted child. So what do? They take him to this safe zone, like you see in the movie Highlander, the neutral zone where nobody can fight with each other, right? So they take him to the safe zone in India, and they put him under the tutelage of Guru Master Ravanaji as a safe area that the bad guys can't get to. They can't penetrate. And that's where they kept him safe for several years. This is the part that nobody talks about as to why he disappears at the age of 12 and then shows up at the age of 30 or 29. That's just one example. But yeah, they're there because the other side doesn't like the fact that these children represent the next generation of our awakening, our evolution on this planet. And the last thing you want is the slave population waking up. That we have, if you just put all that aside, just look at how strong and motivated and enthusiastic the younger generation is now in all aspects of society. I mean, they're fired up. And when you get out there and you see what's going on, you feel like, wow, this is the energy of the 1960s all over again. So that energy has now come full circle, Age of Aquarius and all that. And so we're heading back into the light side of our galaxy as our planet swings around on the edge of the galaxy on this roller coaster ride. And that instigates the type of energy needed to stand up to this, to awaken, to basically let the architects of power know that we know you're there and you can't pull our strings or push our buttons anymore. We are the masters of our own destiny. We have our own spiritual sovereignty, and you can't take that away from us. Unfortunately, those in power are known to not give it up too easily, and definitely not without a fight. And that's what we're seeing happening now.
I'm thinking while you're talking, in terms of, all of you hear, down through the years, all of the different ones who said, they were taken, or women who said they were pregnant and then the fetus was gone, and people who have been taken on the ship and they see they're brought to babies that although they look alien, they have a human quality and they feel a kinship to a child, men and women, like that, that they may have been so those children, hybrids who were like they say of Yeshua, human and divine. So the divinity in this case would be maybe the extraterrestrial part of them, human and divine, as opposed to the time of the incubator babies who were soulless. Can you do? So did they keep the soul portion when they made the divine divine connection, as opposed to however they made these babies during the, they say all of the, I find it hard to fathom that 7,000 plus women had premature babies and said, yeah, take my baby and put them in the World's Fair so that they can live. They were making babies. That's a Cabbage Patch Kid thing. So those would be man's attempt to mimic the war,
right? Because if a certain influence out there would love nothing more than to try and use those incubators, babies, okay, to reverse engineer themselves into the gene pool of this planet, because that gets into a whole other area of Mother Earth being the throne of power, and us as humanity being the inheritors of that throne, the caretakers of that throne, which we were forced to forget about. So these others that have come along that are half man, half God, or half human, half alien, as we say today, they came along to wake up humanity. You see this with Tot in the Egyptian history, and what he was educating everybody on, the reason for building these pyramids as a belt around the planet to hold it together with the proper frequency when certain intergalactic challenges came along. But there's always been these other beings who, and maybe the same one all along, it's just different cultures saw it the same way. Yes, so the more divine element is the benevolent factions, but that's something that has always been there in our gene pool since the beginning. It never left. It was suppressed. We were made to forget, and now it's coming back to the surface. That's what that side of it that you mentioned before. That's what's called the gene for passion, and that was a genetic code given to us to elevate us so that we could think and be self-aware and realize who we are and be able to absorb the information in terms of who we are, why we were created, which obviously has its humble beginnings and maybe is not much to brag about. But the point is, we were taught to elevate ourselves out of that, because that wasn't supposed to be the definition of our existence. It was forced upon us against our will. So that gene for passion ends up filtering through. We're speaking spiritually, metaphorically here and symbolically, filters through the Temple of Solomon. And when it comes out the other side, it is now known as the Passion of the Christ. And that's where that term came from. Okay.
So you just said that earlier. So in terms of the Passion of the Christ, we're not talking about the singular individual that we've been given as Jesus Christ, but those who have the Christ anointing, if you will, and the passion, meaning having a special something that was instilled that set them apart from.
Yes, and when you're looking at it from the side of, let's say, spiritual sovereignty and spiritual warfare, if you want to rest it at that doorstep, Hiram Abiff, characterized as the first African God-man, there's your God-man again, okay, is the one who laid the foundation for the Temple of Solomon. The Temple of Solomon being a symbolic reference to the human body, okay, the human being. And it's not any physical chunk of real estate that you can go and see, although others will argue with me, I found the Temple of Solomon, it's buried under this and that, and the Temple of Herod. I don't really care, because it means absolutely nothing in the grand scheme of things. Great, I'm glad you found it. Good luck with that. But they're not thinking of the bigger picture. And so each one of these Christs, plural, that came along, whether it be Jesus, known more properly as Isa, or Muhammad, or Noble Drew Ali, or Mithra, or Buddha, the original Buddha, each one of these prophets that came along, they were building another wing onto the Temple of Solomon to build it up. And of course, what does that really mean in translation? That means each one of them were awakening the human spirit in us to awaken that Temple of Solomon out of the mentality of a beast and into the awareness of an enlightened being. So that was the whole purpose for establishing the Temple of Solomon on earth. And each one of these gifted people with that extraterrestrial gene for passion running through their bloodline added another piece to the Temple of Solomon, building it up along the way, so that there would be a force to reckon with if, let's say, the opposing team tried to force their will on us with just outright force, not even hiding in the shadows. Because at that point, if we if we've reached that point where we've become self-aware, we realize who we are with our starborn legacy, and the other side doesn't want to give it up because of their profiteering, and they try to come in by force, this is when the benevolent factions will step in and say, you're violating the decree. They woke up. Okay? You got away with murder when they forgot and they were asleep, but now they're awake to reclaim their sovereignty. You cannot violate that. You have to leave. We're not quite at that point yet, but we're getting there.
Okay. Okay. So from a standpoint of I guess forgetting, before I even get there, I want to know from your perspective where let's go back to the second book, The Moor, the Mason, and the Alien. Where does the Moor and the Mason, how does that all tie into the Moorish legacy and all of that? I mean, because a lot of times we don't see folks that look like me in the scheme of extraterrestrial things. Now lately, the people that are seeing these craft and so forth, some of them, a lot of people, all kinds of people are seeing them. But back when you wrote that book, the first, The Moor, the Mason, and the Alien, how did you tie the Moorish legacy or so into this whole?
In the years of researching this and my own experiences, I realized that everything that has happened on this planet comes down to three basic tenets: the Moorish legacy, the Masonic agenda, and the extraterrestrial element, alien contact, which tends to have a dubious nature at times because there's the benevolent factions that are on the side of the Moorish legacy, and the malevolent factions are on the other side. So that's how the term, the Moor, the Mason, and the Alien became the title for the book, to describe those three basic things that everything in our history comes down to. So the Moorish legacy represents basically the legions of light. They inherited that gene for passion, the Christ energy. They are the family of man. They are the sun-kissed people of color and hue. Okay? They are the ones that represent the defenders of the throne throughout their history. They are the ones that defend the Christ energy. So that's where that part ties in. And what I mentioned before about the gene for passion becoming the passion of the Christ as it passes through the Temple of Solomon, that's the Moorish legacy, the Temple of Solomon right there, the living embodiment of it on several levels. So there's a lot more on that side I can get into. It goes a little deeper than that. But then you have on the other side what I describe in the book as the pale-skinned outcast, because if the sun-kissed people of color and hue represent the family of man, then how does the pale skin fit in? And so that's something I also talk about in the book, how the pale skin was forced upon the family of man as an outcast and to be used in a very domineering and colonial manner. This is when all of a sudden your European superpowers show up and start with a decree to wipe the floor up with the family of man. So in a nutshell, that's the Masonic side of it. Basically, the pale skin side, how the pale skin comes into it, why it exists, and how it got used. Now, it's part of the family of man, but it basically broke off because it was allowed to be sucker punched by its own ego instead of listening to the Christ energy. Because what happened was these other bad actors started sneaking among them and making promises to them about, hey, look at our shiny tools, look at our sophisticated power. We can show you how to use them too if you do what we tell you. And once that happened, that's that splinter group that broke away. They had to follow a certain decree at that point. And that decree was, from this day forward, all of your children, grandchildren, and anything part of your bloodline and generations that come later, now they belong to us. They're our property. And that was the fundamental beginning of the alien abduction phenomenon right there. So this is how that aspect of it plays in. They also were given a decree that if you want to stay at the top of the pyramid of power and be above the law and basically have the system of law designed around you to buffer you, then we need you to go out there and destroy the family of man. That was the sole driving force of colonialism. Women didn't fare much better with that agreement either, because the real power, or the female principle, was ultimately seen as a direct threat to that power structure that was all about the iron hand of oppression, which stood against the gene for passion, the Christ energy. So on one side you had the Temple of Solomon, on the other side you had the Grand Masonic Lodge. So at that point, I decided, okay, this is what it's coming down to. That's where the title of the book's going to go. And how did that come into existence? Well, when we go back further, we find out the collective community had a huge involvement in how that evolved on both sides. So we already talked about the gene for passion, but on the other side, there was the influence of what I described in the book as the two-party system. Now, we might be used to that term today, but we don't realize where that term actually came from. So what was designed in that respect was you would always have upper management and middle management, okay, a two-party system. And that two-party system ultimately manifested in two empires coming together. The reptilian queens, or the Satar Queens, and the Canis feudal lords. And from Canis, we get canines, so you can imagine what they look like.
The dogs.
Yeah. People ask me, what did they look like? Well, if you watch the movie The Howling, you'll get a good idea. They were bipedal, and they were hungry for getting out there and dominating, because the driving factor was profiteering with rich tradable commodities, so you're always going to be expanding the empire. Eventually, that brings them to our backwater system here at the edge of the Milky Way. What they found here was something that, from their perspective, they couldn't afford to give up or turn away from. So herein lies the beginning of the colonization of our solar system and the handing down, so to speak, of the two-party system. Because at a certain point, that two-party system of Repto-Syrian fascism ended up becoming known as the Rock of Pharaohs and the Rock of Shields, upper management and middle management. And from those Rock of Pharaohs and Rock of Shields, it's interesting to see where those phrases went, because
would those be like the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds?
Yeah, that's how it became misinterpreted and mispronounced as that. Yeah. So it's not, when you hear the phrase two-party system, we're not talking about what it got watered down to with Republicans and Democrats. You got to go back and see where that mentality came from and where it started. And the two-party system, it'll always be there. You won't escape it, but you can evolve out of it. Okay. And it's everywhere. I mean, you have the Federal Reserve and the IRS. That's a two-party system. You have the corporate conglomerate and the media monopoly. That's a two-party system. Okay. You have Big Pharma and the FDA. That's a two-party system. So these two-party systems are everywhere in our world. Once you see it, you can't not see it. You start realizing, oh, okay, this is how upper management and middle management diversify themselves. So you can't really see them right away. And even to the point where the high priesthood of ancient times is now the pharmaceutical multinational, because you really can't walk around calling yourself the high priesthood. That would be too obvious. So that became Big Pharma, the pharmaceutical multinational. And I'm not talking about the good aspects of the high priesthood at the time, which was the Aman. I'm talking about when it got hijacked later on and became the Amun-Ra for a different reason. So, and I talk about that in the books too, where those two collided with each other. So the other aspect is, well, what happened to women? How did they lose their sovereignty? How did they lose their legacy that they're reclaiming now? That was the focus of part 2 that you have there, the real power, or the real manifesto. Mm-hmm. And at a time when, you know, women and men were in a society based on a matriarchy, there was that equality there, but the women were, you know, just above that. You see this in ancient Egypt. The truth versus the academic mentality we have today that's dominated by men. You'll see a statue of a female Egyptian holding her hand on the shoulder of a male Egyptian in front of her. Now, your average white male academic would look at that and see, that tells us it was a patriarchy. The men were in control. No, that's a complete bastardized interpretation. What's really happening there is that the woman is in control. She's the head of the household, and she is presenting the man she chose as her mate to everyone, saying, this is the one I chose, hands off, don't touch him. That's what's being depicted there. That's the real power, the female principle. So even going back to Egypt, that was based on the matriarchy. It's just that the way history is taught has twisted that around to make it look like it was all about a patriarchy, but that patriarchy was an invasion that came to this planet. And the reason it was twisted around that way is because, once again, the real power, the female principle, that was a dangerous threat to that power structure. They couldn't attack it head on. So what better way to go after it than to dismantle it from the inside out? What's the one thing that the women trusted? Their husbands, their sons, their fathers, the men. Of the two sides of the species, which one is more malleable and easy to manipulate? Men. Okay. So here we have a case where the man's ego was now manipulated with the idea that you could take a tool and raise it over your head and turn it into a weapon, and then be a dominant king, a dominant tyrant. And that's when women were forced to their knees out of sheer fear of that kind of terror and that kind of abuse and that kind of violence. So at that point, that psychic ability, that vril power, receded and subdued out of fear. You see this throughout history, where it evolved into just accusing any woman at random of being a witch if she stepped out of line or had an epileptic seizure or spoken a different language, or had the audacity to be smarter than the rest of the troglodytes around her. All of a sudden, she's a witch, burn her at the stake. Okay. That is what gave birth to our culture of rape in our society. The agenda to destroy the real power, not by means of being able to destroy it, because you can't, but by means of subjecting it to such severe conditions that it gets subdued and recedes. So now this has rolled out to, once again, what we see happening today, this anti-woman sentiment, this culture of rape that's like, we need to put them in their place, stick them back in the kitchen. They're supposed to be barefoot and pregnant. That's what they're good for. No.
Well, wasn't
That
it?
is-
Was it? Correct me if I'm wrong. Wasn't it the? I forgot what they were called. The Satar, what it, Queens that actually sent the Canis, the one you said that were those out to actually
yeah,
survey for them, for
yes.
them.
The Satar Queens, the reptilian queens, they had expanded their empire far enough where they came in contact with another very old empire, the Canis Empire. And so they went at it with each other for a while and realized this is not cost effective. We're taking losses when we should be working together to profiteer. So a tentative agreement came into effect. The reptilian queens would be upper management. They would make the decree. The Canis feudal lords would be middle management. They would carry out the decree. And their job was to go out there and find those tradable commodities in different solar kingdoms or solar systems. So yes, that is what resulted in what we refer to today as King Anu and his two sons, Prince Ea and Prince Enlil, and his daughter, Princess Ninhursag. This is where things begin to evolve about why the gene for passion came into existence at all on this planet in the gene pool. As things go, absolute power corrupts absolutely. The brothers did not get along. The one in charge didn't want to be here, so he hated anything that represented us and our ancestors. And the other one was the master geneticist, both him and his sister, Prince Ea and Princess Ninhursag. At a certain point, when he saw how his genetically modified slaves were being used and abused to the point of just dying from all the abusive conditions they were put through, he decides to break off and create a splinter group of his own, which was completely against the decree of the queens and his father, King Anu. The slave was known as the Adapa, Ad-Apa, Ad meaning mud of the earth. Apa eventually becomes ape, means to mimic, obviously like the word ape today. The primate of the earth, the ape of the mud, okay? The one who is just smart enough to push buttons and pull strings and take orders, but not smart enough to be aware. I think, therefore I am. They were not capable of that. So Prince Ea takes a certain group of its own and proceeds to do the very thing that was forbidden. And this is how the concept of the forbidden tree of knowledge comes into existence, because he takes them into secret caves and starts teaching them who they are. And since you're trying to teach slaves who were designed to be a little slow-witted anyway, so he had to speed that up. This is when he and his sister go to a race of beings that play a key role in our existence, and they were known as the Ankiels. And it's just like you're thinking, Ankiel. It's Ankhels, Ankiels. The root word being Ankh, of course, and that's an obvious relationship here to this story. They are kind of like an avionic bird-like race of beings. You see them depicted pretty well in the movie The Abyss by James Cameron. Those underwater beings that were translucent. They were there, but they weren't there. They had mass, but you could see right through them. That's what the Ankiels are like, the ultra-terrestrials. Partly in our three-dimensional world, but evolved to a different dimension as well. They're the ones that held the genetic code that Prince Ea and Princess Ninhursag needed to kickstart slaves with this select group that he picked. That genetic code was passion, the gene for passion, the ability to think, therefore I am, become self-aware, and therefore absorb information that much faster. So this is how that select group ends up splintering off from the Adapa, and they become known as not the Adapa, but the Adam, or Adam. And once again, you break that word down into its two syllables, ad, om being sound, frequency, that awakens the beast of the mud and clay. That's what Adam really becomes, or atum, as the Egyptians would spell it, atum, which is the original reference. So with that, now they're infused with that advanced genetic code. Now they're starting to absorb the information that much better. Okay. But Prince Aya also needed something to make the whole education move along a lot quicker as you're doing this on the down low and trying not to be caught. So he was using a particular device that he spoke into. Hence for the whole idea of Metatron, the voice of God. That's where this comes from, those ideas. He becomes the voice of God, so to speak. And by speaking through this device, he was able to transmit the information that much quicker into their minds in a speeded up manner, and in a way that now with the gene for passion, they could retain it that much better. That device, because of its association with him, that device was known as the Ankh, associated with the Ankiels. Because he was using it, and because the anointed ones saw the association of it with him, he stopped being Prince Aya and at least to them, he became known as the Ankh, or the Anki. And that's how the name Enki comes into existence, as a mispronunciation of Ankh. And at that point, the anointed ones, the Adam, they become the elevated ones who know what's going on now. Well, word gets out. Enki's been a bad boy, creating the anointed ones that are now self-aware. And so his rather sadistic brother, Enlil, decides to get even with him and go on a killing spree. The anointed ones scatter, and they knew they had to hide because they couldn't stand up to that firepower. They end up running, becoming masters of stealth. They end up running for the hills and mountains and the forests to hide out there. They became masters because they had to learn how to hide from Enlil. They became masters of guerrilla warfare and stealth. Some of them left with Enki when he escaped to go to the Pleiades. You see some of that influence Native American culture with the Navajo, who have the story behind Devil's Tower, with the graded claw marks on the side of Devil's Tower, that giant thing that Steven Spielberg used in Close Encounters. In that there were 7 sisters caught on that mountain because a bear changed them up there, a giant bear. The UFO came down and rescued them and took them, and they said they would return. The reason the 7 sisters is so significant is because that becomes the 7 Pleiades in that mythology. So even the Native Americans know about that history. And so the Adam that went with Prince Aya, they evolved into something else in the Pleiades. He continued experimenting with them to evolve them. There are others that stayed. They knew they had an obligation. They said, no, we can't all go. Some of us have to stay to protect our brothers and sisters who are getting, killed off left and right here, the Adapo. So those that stayed are still here with us today. The other term that was used for them at the time was the Iesu, Adam, anointed ones, Iesu. From Iesu, you have that mispronunciation of Jesus, or Jesus. And once it watered down to English, it became mispronounced as Jesus. Isa, the one we call Jesus, that was his proper name. That's another variation of Yesu as well. you'll find that name or that term is prevalent in the Middle East all around. And it's where other names like Asa came from. So there's that. But I mentioned earlier, they're still with us today. So who are they? Well, nowadays, I mentioned how they are masters of stealth, guerrilla warfare, hiding in the mountains. We're basically talking about the Sasquatch or the orangutan or the water bobjin or the Yowie of Australia. These are the anointed ones, the Adam, and they still walk among us.
Well, they say that they have a power's ability to appear and disappear, and they have that they are always seemingly there's normally UFO sightings where they are and so forth. So would that be the connection that they still have with?
Yes, that's a direct relationship there. And they have their own clans, tribes, okay? Like the ones here in North America, they seem to all have that darker brown hair or fur. The ones in Southeast Asia is where you get that Gigantopithecus, okay? That dark skin, orange, red hair, huge like the Bigfoot, tremendous. And the two descendants that come from that singular ancestor are the orangutan. You got the squat, chubby one and the thin, little one. Okay, the two orangutan races. They came from Gigantopithecus. And so they were also known as, like the way we call them Sasquatch here. Over there, they were known as the orangutan. And that's where the word orangutan came from by mispronunciation. Orangutan just simply means forest people. And because they were masters of stealth, they knew how to hide. But they have a whole inner community themselves too.
So why are they so hairy? I guess if they were to get them and shave the hair off, they'd look more so-called like today, or no, they still have have the old, they still, I guess they haven't evolved as the others did. There's one thing about the Bible scripture that talks about let us make man, you know, in our image and our likeness. So there had to be a different look, and there had to be some type of genetic modification that they added some of themselves into something to create more of what we would call modern man or something.
Yes, I mean there was a well, as things evolved, we're more so coming from the Adapa, but one of the things to realize is that, and any anthropologist will admit to this, is that nowadays the new understanding is that there is no straight line in the evolutionary path. Okay, in the good old days, they used to try to draw these straight lines. Well, this splintered off to that one, this splintered off to this one. You know, Australopithecus, Homo habilis, Homo erectus. Nowadays, we're finding out it's just a big ball of a mess, you know, wrapped up all around itself and can go in 57 different ways, because as the truth is coming to the surface about our ancestry and our human origins, we're finding out there is no clear line to draw. It went all over the place. So at some point, I'm sure there was a splintering from the Sasquatch or the Yowie or the orangutan that ends up going in the direction of modern man or our ancestors like Homo habilis, Homo erectus. And we use these terms really only to segregate out a time frame. It's been shown that if Homo erectus was given a haircut and you put a suit on him or her, and bring them into modern times, you wouldn't be able to pick them out from anybody else. They would be able to learn everything, do everything, function like we do. There isn't, I mean, it's argued that that's where we stopped at that point, because there is no Homo sapiens. That's a glorified term from Greek terminology, the thinking man. That's not evolutionary. We stopped at Homo erectus, okay? And then early humans come out of that. So when you're looking at Homo erectus, you're not looking at anything different than what exists today among us, okay? And that's why I often say we are them and they are us, our human origins. It's like things are overlapping here in the gene pool through cellular memory, through racial memory. This is where we're starting to realize things we weren't taught. Why do we know these things? Because it's coming up in racial memory and cellular memory. That is what the atom represents as well. So I don't doubt that in that hairball crisscross thing of evolution, that the Sasquatch is obviously directly connected to us, in that the adopter for the most part became us, and they went the other way in that splinter. But they're here because they know they're part of the family of man too, and they have an obligation when we fall down to help us get back up again. And we've done that several times in the past, where the human race has just fallen down. When we first started splitting the atom and then experimenting with the atomic bomb in New Mexico, this is what set off a firestorm in that community of the anointed ones, the Atom, the Iesu. And because of their relationship with the galactic community, this is when an all points bulletin went out, and all of a sudden you have this flurry of UFO activity all over, because now, you know, the general idea was, who taught these idiots how to split the atom? Okay, they don't know how to use it responsibly. I mean, there's some magnificent things that can come from splitting the atom, but we don't seem to be promoting that. And this is where that primate side of us needs to evolve. Because if you just look at our closest cousin, chimpanzees, okay, they're just as intelligent. And you see how their tribal warfare goes on between the different tribes. It is shockingly human, the way they engage in warfare with each other, the way they eliminate the enemy and take over the women and the children and pull them into their tribe to make themselves stronger. Who was it? Jane Austen, who spent her whole life studying them. That's where you can find all the information from. And she's the one that officially got chimpanzees included with the designation of human as part of the human race, because they were already at that point. And they're only a couple chromosomes away from us. So I can only imagine how far ahead the Sasquatch are ahead of us with their gene structure. It'd be amazing to find out what their double helix looks like, if it even is a double helix at that point. But yes, UFOs come down.
Dolphins, though. What about dolphins? You hear so much. You hear that they don't want people to communicate with dolphins, and there are some that talk about the fact that we have evolved from that. We were once in the water. I mean, we are born in water. You know, we spend 9 months or so in water, floating around, and we get out here and we forget how, you know, when we start breathing, I guess our lung capacity then is now activated, and we forget the fact that we were in water. And then they say that the dolphins are so intelligent and they're communicating with some people, actually have the ability to communicate. And it's almost like a connection, say, even with the mermaids, so the mermaids and the mermen, that the dolphins and they are all connected to us from where we may have, you know, come up out, you know, evolved from the water, even before the other manipulation took place. And that now there seems to be an awakening, like the dolphins are trying to bring messages, and those other, you know, powers that are trying to make sure that they've made laws that say you can't communicate with them. They afraid we make fake.
And yet they have done miraculous things with people and children and adults who are autistic, or they have Down syndrome. I mean, I've seen that interaction there, and it's just fantastic. It's like all of a sudden they come alive being with the dolphin, and the dolphin becomes that much more animated with them. So I think Linda loves dolphins, and we have always thought that the mammals of the sea are connected to us, or we are connected to them. The speed at which we suspect the dolphin can communicate is phenomenal. You know, how much is really being said in those clicks and whirs between them? How much is being said between the humpback whales when they send their message across the sea to other pods? There is in my books, I talk about how the blue whale, humpback whales, and all of them, they represent the libraries of the sea, and the Sasquatch represents the libraries of the land. So they both have equal standing. And when the time comes, they'll release that information from the sea and the mountains at the same time. And I have a feeling a lot of that has to do with building us up and getting us ready for official first contact too. It's related to that.
How do you see that in the next, they say a lot about 2030. So do you see that official first contact happening between now and then, or is that maybe a linchpin for or is it just that they're just throwing the date out? Because they put a lot of dates out. We had Agenda 2025 and now it's 2030. So they keep going out,
Yeah. There's things that always come up in the UFO insider community, like, oh yeah, it's going to come about in the next few years. Get ready. Well, we're seeing a lot of it in the sky now, and it's probably going to become more prevalent. But whether or not they come down here to actually talk to us is a different story. Making themselves known would be phase one. I mean, en masse, not just lights in the sky that disappear are there and then go out, or a ship that's accidentally seen and then it suddenly disappears, like you mentioned earlier.
They didn't have that cloaking device.
Right. No, to be intentionally known is a big step, because with the mentality we have on this planet today, taking everything into account, some of us would approach it like myself, we'd be amazed, but a lot of people out there would think, well, they're showing their dominance by force by making themselves known in such an overpowering manner. That's not necessarily true. That's just our mentality that we haven't evolved out of. And that's because we are primarily militaristic. Every UFO that's been retrieved, every alien body that's been retrieved, it's been done with the sole agenda of how can we weaponize it in our favor to use it against our enemies. And that mentality of use it against our enemies is problematic for official first contact. Because now certain hostile elements that don't want to give up that power are going to take it to the next level. Like we've had the war on drugs, we've had the war on terror. So, and Dr. Greer has said this. What's the next level? Alien invasion. That may just be manufactured as another terrorist element to give credence to introducing all these evolved weapons that they've been working on, from reverse engineered craft, to now use it against the manufactured or fabricated enemy, and in truth actually using it on us to keep us in fear. So I would warn people to be careful of that grand illusion. Can there be a real alien invasion? Sure. Why? Why would there be? When you look at it from both sides, the benevolent factions are obviously not going to do that. They're here because they have an investment in, esoterically speaking, flesh and bone, which refers to our relationship, our ecological balance with the planet and the planet itself. Okay, you see that kind of theme in movies like The Day the Earth Stood Still, the original and the remake. And then you have the other side, the malevolent factions. Well, if you are profiting off of an ignorant slave race, and you are that small minority of power, you're not going to expose yourself by force. You're not going to come down and destroy your profit margins, and you're certainly not going to ruin that pyramid scheme of power and economic slavery you've built up over God knows how long within the psyche of humanity. You're not going to want that to happen either. So if there's some other malevolent faction that wants to do that, well, they're going to have to contend with those who have an interest in, once again, what's esoterically known as wood and stone, an investment in the real estate and tradable commodities of this planet, because now you're violating someone else's profit margin. And as far as the benevolent factions go, I mentioned earlier, they have investment in humanity. A lot of them are here because we have this beautiful planet of ocean that is rare. It's out there, but it's rare. And they find that extremely valuable, and we're not taking care of it. So we are in violation of our relationship with Mother Earth. That's another thing that the Moorish Legacy represents, that balance with Mother Nature. And the pale skin historically has represented the destruction of that, because I say we, but when the pale skin came into existence, it was for the sole purpose of turning their back on the family of man and Mother Earth at the same time. So,
You know the
as far
story
as,
of
yeah,
Yakub, the
yeah,
big head scientist. So
yeah, I know. I think that's Malcolm X started going down that road, and then he gave up on it because it probably wasn't the right time to be bringing that up during his time. But I think I would have loved to have gone back in time and have a conversation with him just to see where his mind was at on that, and have a dialogue with him. But then again, I'd want to do that with Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. as well. But just to pick their brains and have that exposure to the way they thought.
well, Granshi Tashariq Bey actually does a wonderful explanation of that. He actually, he had me go into do a deep dive, just to look into that,
Right.
and why was it done? So I'm like, why would he do? He was, why did he, want to like genetically create a contrasting, in a sense, almost race of people to pit against the other. We didn't get into that, but I've kind of gone down. I even went into Chat GPT, which gave me a great explanation about it. So it's not an unknown tale, whether or not it's factual.
I didn't want to throw the show off the rails by getting into that, but yes, that gets into how the pale skin came into existence,
right?
By forcing it on the ecosystem of this planet and the family of man. And that's why in the books I refer to that as the pale skinned abomination, because that wasn't supposed to exist.
Now, because you talked about the family, I know Grand Sheik always talks about the bouquet, sort of, because that, you had the very, allegedly, you had the 12 sons. And so you also actually had different attributes in each of those, tribes, so to speak. So,
right.
And he always calls the bouquet, I think he calls them the bouquet of man. It was like, and you call it the family. So the creating the, as you said, this pale skin, or I said, well, maybe that's where we get the story of the lepers and so forth. So, whatever was being done, it was an abomination to the point where they had to be put, away from the sun in the Caucasus Mountains to kind of, be wild. And then it seems like, I got this download that like you said earlier, something came down and said, look, if you work for me, I'll make this worth your while. And so they got this quick, pump of pumping up their heads and got their egos boosted, and they got this support from somewhere outside that gave them this advantage that they've been holding on to for the last several, 100 years. Yeah.
The thing is that was so deceivingly calculated too. So the opposing team that I'm referring to is what I describe in the book as the Chetu regime. They came about as a mandate from the reptilian queens to move in and take over and report only to them. The Chetu regime, from that, because they were allowed complete autonomy, they became known as the reigning government that was never seen. Okay.
That'd be the shadow government.
Yeah.
The black nobility, which some folks do look like me. Not all, but yeah. More I've been
That
looking into it. It's real
that's
sinister.
that term Shetu became mispronounced as Shedu or shadow.
Shadow. Okay.
So they operate from the shadow. So it's like that one word that the definition actually means where the word came from, believe it or not. They're the ones that started walking among the family of man and whispering into the ear of whoever would listen, um, hey, we can elevate you above your brothers and sisters. And sure enough, they found that group that embraced the ego and rejected um, the the Christ energy or the Temple of Solomon. Those are the ones who, because they saw those beings, the Shetu regime, as all powerful with their technology and what they knew and their calculating behavior, they wanted to become more like them, because the mentality was, if we make ourselves look like them, we'll become powerful like them too. That's what gets into that whole aspect of them experimenting on themselves in such horrific and ungodly manners, to the point where they just simply bled the color out of their skin. And at that point, that's when they couldn't really handle the sun. So there had to be some place to put them, because basically the family of man was still looking at them as their brothers and sisters. Okay. As the old phrase goes, I am my brother's keeper and my sister's protector. So there was always that door left open to come back to the family of man if the Pale Skin could straighten themselves out and learn the error of their ways. There had to be a place to put them to keep them safe. That became this transcontinental prison, this dead land that nobody cared about. Okay. And they were marched up there. And in that march, that pale skin got scorched by the sun. By the time they reached Europe, they were in a state of mental, psychological, emotional turmoil from the whole ordeal of realizing, oh my God, look at what we did to ourselves. And then that whole march up to the Caucasus Mountains and that whole region. And then they were left there with the understanding that here's the olive branch. Okay, once again, the olive being the symbol of the Moorish legacy. Here's the olive branch. We're here for you. We haven't abandoned you. Okay. But now they're there by themselves in their own misery. Once again, this was all calculated because they, as in the Shetu regime, knew that this would be the outcome. Why? Because they're masters of mathematical calculation in all probabilities. So by creating this rebellious bunch of malcontents, they knew there would be no choice but to banish them. This is where you get a lot of the mythology about being banished from the Garden of Eden. Okay. And being sent out into the barren, rough world that was dangerous to be in. That's, of course, that northern part. To give them a connection back to the family of man and let them know they're not being forgotten. That transcontinental prison was named after the African Queen Europa. And that's how Europe becomes Europe, is Europa, which also just happens to be one of the moons out by Jupiter. And now, this is where things take a tragic turn. Now the Shetu regime homes in on them. They know they got them all to themselves now. And they start working on them psychologically, emotionally. Hey, your dark-skinned brothers and sisters just abandoned you. They don't give a damn about you. They're not coming back for you, but we're here for you. We'll take care of you. We care about you. And look, we'll even give you all these shiny things that we have, and we'll teach you how to use them, and we'll give you world dominance, and we'll put you at the top of the totem pole forever if you do these decrees, which I talked about earlier. Your bloodline now belongs to us for experimentation, and we expect you to go out there and affect the family of man in a very negative way and destructive way. Put the idea being, put them in their place, destroy their cultures, destroy their knowledge, their wisdom, their memory, destroy their racial memory, destroy their cellular memory, destroy their connection to their lineage, to the past. Don't ever let them remember their starborn legacy. And so this is where you start having a three-pronged military campaign against the family of man. The first of which can be seen as the African Muafa of West Africa. The second can be seen as the Native American genocide, especially with the Trail of Tears into Oklahoma. The third can be seen as the open door policy against China and Asia in general, because none of that went well, and China didn't fare well after that. And because of that, that gave rise to this communist reactionary movement to kick out anybody that they didn't want there. And so that's that three-pronged thing. And going after those three areas basically brought everything to a standstill, and in more control with recognizing that these so-called more developed countries were now north of the equator. Anything south of the equator was considered second-rate or third world, and referred to as a banana republic. And of course, what's the majority that exists north of the equator? People who look like me. This is where the power got consolidated into the European superpowers, and then later on extended over into the Americas, with an assault on the original clan mothers, who were the ones who decreed the law of the land over here. So they had to be removed too. They were attacked. Their power was cut out from under them. To this day, you have the Native American communities recovering from that, because there's all sorts of domestic violence issues and substance abuse issues that they are recovering from to put their community back together. And it's a heck of a lot better now than it ever was in the past. The same thing was done to African communities.
Well, we like to be referred to as the Aboriginals because we reject the narrative that we were all brought over here on slave ships, because there are many families that can trace their lineage for generations being on these soils, owning their own land. Now we see the sharecropping situation, and there was a takeover. So enslaved people were once people who owned and were Aboriginal, indigenous to this land mass.
Right.
So we want to make sure that
the Moors were master mariners who traveled across the seas, and they went back and forth long before those European superpowers came along. So that is true. I mean, Moors were here already, as the argument goes, and then the agreement came along where, well, we've been infiltrated, we're not doing so well, we need to recede into the background. And who was the only person around to basically hand the reins off to? And that was the pale skin. The agreement was, you can have it for now temporarily, but we're coming back. It belongs to us. Since then, that agreement has been violated 6 ways to Sunday, and nobody's giving anything back. So this is where we see this friction coming out today of, let's label them all as Black, and that gets into a whole understanding of why that was done.
Right.
Because if you do that, Cynthia Martinell brings it up in one of her books, to label that dark skin as Black, just canvas it across the board, all Black, means now you're seen as the Walking Dead. Okay, with no identity whatsoever. You don't refer to Asians as yellow. You don't refer to Native Americans as reds. Well, some white people still do, but and so it's like everybody else has their nationality. So you just have to then step back and ask yourself, well, where the hell do Black people come from? Where does Black come from? That's not a nationality. That's not a race. So that's when it starts to get into how that term was weaponized to
Right.
destroy, once again, our ancient knowledge of where we come from, our human origins. And a lot of that plays into how weaponized programs were enforced. Once again, the Chateau regime handed this down. One of those that came directly from them was eventually something that erupted in the Caribbean and traveled up into the slave states of the South, and that was the Willie Lynch denationalization program, in which case that slave owner was asked to come up to the southern states and teach those slave owners how to keep them under control. And that was effectively done because the philosophy was, how do we sever them from their family, their lineage, and their sense of community? Well, you basically put the mother into psychological trauma by seeing her source of strength, her husband, torn to pieces right in front of her. And then who's the only other strong man standing there that, in her fear to protect her children, she's going to reach out to for protection, and that's going to be the white slave master. And this is how that psychology was created.
Yeah. That was yeah. So,
And that, once again, was an assault on the family man that came directly from the Chateau regime, passed down through upper management and middle management of your corporate agenda there. And some might ask, well, how would you describe the Chateau regime? Well, they became known as the shadow government, and they are what we term today as the Greys with extraterrestrial contact.
really?
But I make a delineation, a specific one in the book, because I didn't want that term, as it has been used and abused in the same way that some other racial slurs on this planet have been used and abused, to canvas a whole genotype out there that looks similar. And my argument was, well, if you take someone like me and dump me in the middle of Southeast Asia, am I really going to be able to tell the difference between Korean, Japanese, Chinese, someone who's from Hong Kong or Shenzhen? Am I going to know the difference between Vietnam and Thai? No, I'll get to that after a couple of years of living there. I'll figure it out. I'll figure out the differences in the dialects and the subtle tones that are used to pick up on who's who. But dropping me in the middle of it, that's like taking a human being and dropping them in the middle of that type of alien genotype. All we're going to see is, oh, that's a gray. So, and there's others out there, Zeta Reticuli, the Ponti, okay? There's a lot of other races that you stand them next to each other, you realize how different they really are once you start looking at them. And so I define in the book what the grays really are. These are cybernetic organisms. They're basically supercomputers on two legs. And these are the ones that can calculate those probability factors to figure out how to manipulate the scenario down the line. So
they're AI, they're artificial intelligence,
you could call them that, yeah.
so to speak.
They bleed, but they are a lot like the way in the remake of Battlestar Galactica with Edward James Olmos, the Cylons had evolved into human form. They didn't look like they traditionally did back in the 70s with the original show. And so that's because they used that technology, AI or whatever, cybernetics, to merge the two together so that they could walk around with flesh and bone, but they were still Cylons. They were still cybernetic. Okay. That's what we're talking about here. And so that's why I wanted to make that delineation and separate them out and say, hey, this is what you might characterize as the grays, not all those others. Okay. You have to stop using that term for all of them. That's no different than using the word black for everyone who is darker than me. It's the same concept. So that's who they are. The ones who are often characterized as the grays, that's them with that seemingly insectoid or reptilian look to them with the almond-shaped large eyes. And they report directly back to the queens. And if you look at instances of people who have described their experiences with these type, they'll say it felt like they were scanning me with their eyes or looking right through me. Well, yeah, that's the cybernetic organism studying you as a specimen. So other alien beings and races that look similar, that's going to be more of a genteel human experience. You don't feel like you're being scanned like a lab rat. So, yeah, but when I started hearing people report that back, I was like, yeah, that fits right in with the Chetu regime. That's what they would do. To diminish the human being is to diminish the Temple of Solomon and to diminish gene for passion, because they know they can't get to it directly. They can't destroy it, just like the real power. So they'll destroy everything around it. Okay, your body gets disease, your mind gets disease, and then everything else falls down like a domino effect if you don't realize what's happening and how to heal yourself. So that's where the new high priesthood, the modern day high priesthood known as Big Pharma, comes into play. You know, poisoning the gene pool of the human race means keeping that real power and that gene for passion subdued.
Do you remember there was a series called The Event, and I'm trying to think, it was back in like maybe 2010 or something like that. And it was about the this group of so-called aliens or extraterrestrials that had crashed on Earth or come to Earth, because now I'm not sure what people are saying they're interdimensional, whether or not they're out there or inside. But anyway, allegedly they crashed, and a lot of them just ended up out in society and blended. I don't know whether it never said that they shape shifted or anything, but they look like us. They look like, everybody, all of the humans look, except there was a whole section of them, including the head ET, which was a female, being kept in a place they called Inastranca, and it was like it looked like Antarctica.
Okay.
And it was around the time, and there was a as they call it, an African American president, but it was, so Obama came in in 2008. This is like 2010, 2011. So it turned out that you couldn't tell them from us, except they couldn't stay in relationships long because they never grew old.
Oh, okay.
They
Yeah.
never grew old, so they would, but the people that were still in this in captivity, say like say Antarctica, they started planning a revolt to come out. They actually probably could have gotten away a long time ago, but it was years and years that they stayed, and then they ended up, I don't know if anybody, and I watched this series until it got to a place where this planet was coming, like it was getting ready to crash into Earth, and the president's wife and son everybody was trying to get away from it, and the little boy says, "Mommy, what is it?" And she says, "Home."
Oh, okay.
She was one of the ones that was undercover, and that's where it went off. The series ended. They stopped the series, and it was like, at the time, I think they were talking about Nibiru, planet Nibiru returning, and this is 2010, 2011, and that planet was coming, like it looked like it was on fire, because the reason why they'd come here was because their planet was dying anyway, but they'd been here a long time, and most of them had just acclimated themselves within society, but they would have to keep, like I said, because they didn't age. And even people, they were in government, they were doctors, they were all in everything that you could think everybody's in. They were there.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether they were trying to tell something or, because they always put these things in movies.
Well, that gets into the
karma, let's put it out here. We're holding some beings up here in Antarctica that we've had for, we were going to call it Inastranca. That's what they called it.
Yeah. Interesting. That does get into what you described with that show a lot, with what I ended up talking about in the third book, The Invisible College, with how people are being educated on the big and small screens this whole thing with the Moorish Legacy, the Masonic agenda, and extraterrestrial contact. I have to track down that show you're talking about because that sounds
It's called
interesting.
The Event.
Okay.
The Event 20. It ran from 2010 to 2011. It was like 22. Was it 11 or 22 episodes? Anyway, I was just waiting, and then it was like it's not. They didn't continue it. It was. Who's the guy from Three's Company?
John Ritter.
John Ritter's son was in it.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Because
interesting.
Yep, John Ritter's son was in it. But it was very. You probably, if you got one of those streaming things where you can get, you could find it.
Yeah.
But it was so interesting. I mean, they even had a situation, a circumstance in there. It was almost like what's the plane that disappeared from Malaysia flight, was it 370 or whatever it was? When it opens up, it starts with this airplane, a pilot piloting a plane with a group of people, and all of a sudden the plane disappears, and they end up in a like somewhere else. They find them sometime later, but the pilot was even one of them.
Oh, okay. I see.
The pilot was one of them. So it had so many aspects of things. I'm like, okay. And I'm thinking, I don't know when Malaysia flight was that, but this was 2010, 2011. So it could have been around this because it was so similar, the things that were going on in this show.
It sounds like it was influenced a lot by the whole idea of ancient astronauts being part of our history and leading up to the events of today, and some of them walking among us. Because there's no telling what their mortality rate is compared to us and what their longevity is. Maybe their cell structure just doesn't break down the same way ours does over time. And ours really isn't supposed to either. We're just, unfortunately,
programmed. I think we're programmed to self-destruct,
And that's, because if you live longer, you start waking up and remembering, and even going as far as remembering when you mature enough emotionally, and you can start handling things like that better. You'll even get to the point of remembering your past lives and what they were about. Right. And that would get into a whole world of things that
religion and dogma and all of the things that you only have one life, and so you better get it right this time. Pay your tithes and give your offerings and serve Jesus and whoever, the Pope, and they want you to be afraid, be very afraid, and it's a whole fear factor thing. So you're right. And the older, for me, I had to make up in my mind, and wait a minute, hold up, because I was doing this. I know I got more years behind me than I have in front of me. And then I thought, wait a minute, I'm buying into that. I can't buy into that. So I have people saying, oh, Naila, Dr. G, you look like you're aging in reverse. I said, I am, but it's mental. It's absolutely mental, because if you believe whatever you believe and accept, you create that reality. And I have to reject that notion,
Yes, I believe that there are mystics out there who broke the chains of their mortality and lived longer lives than we realized. I don't know if I mentioned this to you earlier or someone else, but that's the whole thing about the master teacher, Gabriel. How does this figure show up with Jesus and then shows up with Muhammad? There's quite a bit of time between there, or Muhammad, and so it's because it was a swift angel, a master teacher, who had evolved to the point where the human lifespan, they broke the restraints of that and lived much longer than expected, and therefore could cover a lot more territory in time as a consistent figure, a consistent master teacher. So it's just, unfortunately, we misinterpreted as an angel without first realizing where the word angel came from.
Messenger, right? Like a
message, right? But it's going back to the Ankiels. That term ended up being mispronounced as Ankiel, like Ankiels, Los Angeles. Okay.
Mhm.
And from there, you get the shrunken term angel. So if you were to look at an Ankiel, you look at the way they're pretty well depicted in the movie The Abyss, you'd think you were looking at an angel anyway. Okay. But it's a highly evolved being, extraterrestrial of some sort. But also, um, because of that genetic code that's in us from that, these evolved mystics and teachers had figured out how to break the bonds of a short lifespan or the mentality of an average human being and live for so much longer because they tapped into that and realized what it was. That comes from the angels as well, the Ankiels. Okay, that ability to break that restraint from our cellular degradation and rejuvenate over longer periods of time.
So those are things, we're hearing now things now, telomeres, shortened telomeres cause, of course they have saying when your telomeres shorten, it shortens your lifespan. So there are various different things, from your mitochondrial DNA and the telomeres that we have to start rejuvenating based on what we're putting into our bodies. And one of the things I just found out recently was that, and I played with this back and forth, but not was chlorophyll and spirulina in its pure form, not heated, is something that actually starts to repair the mitochondria DNA.
Oh, yeah.
And the telomere. I mean, I knew people that drink it. I was like, I don't like the taste of that stuff. But now that I know, I'm 70, so yeah, I better drink some chlorophyll. You know what I mean, and see what we can. My mind is good, but I want to make sure my cells are in line with what my mind is thinking. But there's just so many things that we've bought into, and I'm sure it's part of the agenda.
Right.
We just had an agenda a few years ago, and so it's not that it's just one of, I'm sure, many, because as I hear it, we've had several resets. You got the mud floods and the world's fairs and the Tartarian societies and the things that we just they wiped it out. But I'm so glad that somebody remembered, so that we could start to dig into these things and see who we were and what we did.
Yes, and putting those pieces together takes us closer and closer to our human origins, which we're brainwashed into thinking is way back there and has nothing to do with us now. And we look at it like some strange animal that we can't categorize. And it's like, well, no, it's these things are coming to the surface, like you had mentioned those examples, and this is all leading us back to understanding that what happened way back then is related to what's happening now. There's no separation there. Okay. If anything, it was cataclysmic events that created these horrible events. Like now, the big thing is every scientists are paying attention to the activity building up with the sun, because it's approaching that like 10 or 12,000 year cycle. Looking back over that time, there's indications on Mars and on Earth of, you go back 10 or 12,000 years, what made the ancients so terrified that they had to go and bury all their structures under sand. Göbekli Tepe is an example. They had to dig that out of the sand as if it was buried. It was built, and then they buried it. Why? That's the mystery. What were they so afraid of? And the thing is, these ancient structures, pyramids, megaliths, Göbekli Tepe, they were all made out of stone because they knew that would withstand the onslaught of the sun wreaking havoc, exploding with a coronal mass ejection or a plasma storm that would rip through the whole solar system and create havoc on all the planets in different ways. Mars didn't stand a chance. It didn't have the magnetic field to hang on to its own atmosphere. Earth has a much stronger magnetic field and a thicker atmosphere. So we retain that, but you go back 10 or 12,000 years, you realize the disaster that took place. These megaliths that have vitrified, melted rock. You have to have an extreme amount of heat to melt that, and that would be a plasma storm from the sun hitting the planet.
It couldn't, I guess I hear what you're saying. I kind of, I've seen it differently. I think I'm thinking some type of cataclysmic event took place, but when it comes down to melted, so forth, we know that, even the Bible talks about the war in the heavens. We know that they were technologically advanced. We know that there was nuclear. We see places
Yes,
where there's glass
yes.
and so forth. So the possibility of some type of nuclear blast and happening and vitrifying, if you will, various things. I kind of see things like sort of that way. I don't see people burying a whole community, because where are you going to go when you finish burying it? And then where did you get the sand? How did you get the sand there to bury it? Or did it blow in as a cataclysm and just cover what's there? So I kind of see things differently. That's just me.
The Middle East has that effect that you're talking about too. If you look at the way the desert is laid out, the way it spreads out in a fan shape, like there was an origin point of an explosion and then some kind of nuclear fallout spread out, turning what was a fertile region into a desert region. And you look at the glass structure of the sand in that area, and it's fused in the manner from extreme heat, which is felt to be ties in with those ancient stories about the wars of gods and men. Supposedly there were two opposing factions in the orbit of Earth that went to war with each other, and from that, something equivalent to an atomic weapon was used, and it wiped the floor up with everything in that region in a localized manner. But the fallout from it also created all that damage too, because it spread out. Mesoamerica, the Mayans, they have their own story about a star war, like Star Wars, between gods and men. And they actually have a depiction, they depict it with something that looks like rockets flying back and forth. Okay. I mean, they draw it in their own cultural way, but you're looking at it like, that looks like a rocket. So, yeah. There's that aspect of
it could have been a combination of all of it, but still, I see, and where did they go? Did they go underground themselves, or were they buried under there? If you dig deep enough, would you find the remnants of the people there? But I mean, I'm sure they've already they've dug out places like Göbekli Temple on things like that. But I just think that we, like you said, the older you're getting, the longer you get to stay, the more your memory comes, the cellular memory comes back. And, I've become more of an investigator in my last 10 years of, life, maybe I was 50 something. And then I started looking into things that I had taken for granted up until that point, that what I was taught and told and shown was true. And then pop, something just happened in the middle of something and said, wake up and stop lying yourself, stop listening to all this stuff and investigate, because the truth is there. The truth is out there. If we want to know what really happened, we actually, it'll come to you, because it's in there. And like we say, you're talking about remembrance and so forth. So it's in the cells, it's in the DNA, and it will come. It will come if you want to, because a lot of people are lulled into complacency, and they don't even know that there's anything that they should be looking into. And anybody like yourself and me, we're on the fringe, we're lunatics. But speaking of people, did you ever hear about Simeon Toko?
The name sounds familiar, but I'm going to say no.
He was an Angolan, I want to call him a mystic or something, but he was some of the stories I remember hearing about him when I first was waking up around 2012, that this man was so Christ-like. They said there was at any time, there was on any given time, there's 9 Christs, I remember, on the earth realm at one time. There's, we think of Jesus Christ, but there's like 9 beings that carry
Yeah.
that Christ anointing, and he was one of them. I mean, I think he died in 1984, but even then it was like by his own decision, because prior to that they had tried to kill him so many times. They even I was told they did a surgery on him. They cut him without anesthesia and took his heart out of his chest, and he would not die. They threw
Oh,
him
wow.
out of the plane, and he did. They killed him. Yeah, you gotta look up. His name is Simeon Toko. This man
Okay.
lived yeah, he had to lay his body down because they cut him up. They took his heart out of his chest without even anesthesia. They threw him out of a plane, and they couldn't kill him. And he was a real man that lived. His Simeon Toko. So he had the Christ anointing.
What was going on in his life that he let them do that to him?
Well, he was a like a social justice reformer. He was, he was a spiritual teacher. He was, trying to get the people to,
Right.
So, he and I don't know if the stories were exaggerated, but when I heard about him, he, like I said, he was, he had smallpox as a child, and then, he survived that, and then they were coming against him in every which way, and just the fact that this man would not die until he was ready to. And at that point, it made me think of when they say Jesus said, "No man takes my life, but I,
Yes.
I lay it down freely." And this is what he blew, he really messed a lot of people up, because they thought, we paid you to get rid of him. What do you mean? Like, he's standing here? We threw him out of the plane. We cut him up. We opened up his chest and took his heart out, and he still wouldn't die. So.
I see. So it was like more like a political agenda to get rid of him at that point.
Right. But he was here for on purpose, for a reason. You know what I mean? Yeah. So y'all look him up.
I will. And I wrote his name down. Simeon Toko.
Simeon Toko. Toko. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
got it.
And I'm sure, like I said, there's always a lot of folks here, and who knows, he could have been one of those star beings.
Yes, I don't doubt it, because if he was able to tap into his cellular memory and just divert that living spark around, even when they took his heart out.
Yeah,
that would be phenomenal. Yeah.
Right. So it's just so many things that, and I would call him, like I said, more of a contemporary, because he died in 1984, I believe.
Okay. 1984. All right.
Yeah. So I think he was born I don't know when he was born, but he did, he was born in the 1900s. He just didn't, he was just one of those examples of somebody says, look up Amadou Baba. I'm not sure.
I saw that.
Yeah.
I saw that. Yes. Amadou Baba.
His website.
Something just came to mind. We were talking about the possibility of people going underground. Look at you probably came across this already. The ancient tunnels just outside of Ankara in Turkey. These are old tunnels, and they were created as living spaces, and they go down so far into the ground. It's phenomenal. There's a certain level you get to that you're not allowed to go past because it's not safe and unstable. But the question is, how did they originally build those tunnels so far down and have all the living conditions that they needed to stay underground in those? It was when you look at the way they're done, it's almost like a giant ant colony for humans. The way the tunnels finger out and go everywhere. And how did you even know how to navigate these tunnels without getting lost?
And how did you go down that far and know how far you could go without falling through on the so-called other side?
Yeah, look up the underground tunnels.
Turkey,
just outside of Ankara, the capital of Turkey.
Ankara.
Yeah, Ankara. I believe that's how they spell it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So but in closing for you, um, where do you think we should be putting our focus? This has been, I told y'all this was going to be an eye-opening conversation. We're gonna have to pick it back up and do part two. But where do you see, say, with what's going on now, um in the world, and with politics and this and all of these other things, we're not sure who's doing what, when it comes to the things we're seeing. Where should we be putting our focus as preparing for this first contact?
Yeah.
And before you say that, I heard you say this, and I was like wondering why not a lot of melanated people have these experiences about being taken. Now you said that it was the pale people that made the agreement with the others to be taken and experimented. Is that true? So
Yeah,
there's not many.
that was that foundation that eventually became characterized as the alien abduction phenomena. I mean, you'll find exceptions, but the decree came
Yeah,
down.
the Barney guy and his wife
Yeah,
Betty. He was.
and it's because people are like, well, what about Benny and Barney Hill? I said,
Yeah,
his wife was white.
right.
He was just there by association, and
Okay.
so, and the thing is, it's understood. Don't touch the family of man. And when that does happen, if it does, there is holy hell to pay on the back end. You'll never see it, but there are repercussions if they cross that line. Now, they did with Barney Hill, so I can only imagine what came out of that, because it turns out they were checking him out too, since he was there.
Mhm.
But that's not the norm, okay? It's just, unfortunately, he was there, so okay, he's going too. So,
Guilt by association.
yes, and yeah, I was like, okay, find me some other examples, and then we'll talk. So as far as the other side of it, with people of color and hue, I point out the delineation here. Extraterrestrial intervention belongs to the family of man. The alien abduction phenomena belongs to the pale skin. Okay, and extraterrestrial intervention is that lineage, that starborn lineage, ancient ancestors, ancient astronauts, ancient aliens, call it what you will, that were helping us evolve. Temple of Solomon, Gene for Passion, however you want to phrase it, the Sisterhood, the Sasquatch, they were all part of it, because they were like, we got to give the humanity a leg up here so that they don't forget who they are, and they have the ability to stand up to the other side of the equation, which is trying to oppress them and make them forget. So, by various means, politics, economics, genetics, biology, whatever you want to look at it at environment, climate, okay, poisoning the water, poisoning the food, however, whatever angle you want to take from it, it all leads back to that one singular agenda. Okay, we're not allowed to touch the family of man directly. We'll do it indirectly, because the mentality is, the cop didn't see it, I didn't do it. And that's how the bad guys have been getting away with it all along, because we're all asleep. Once we wake up, now we see what you're doing, now you got to stop. So that's the thing right there. Well, how are they, if they're not supposed to violate the prime directive, how are they getting away with it? Well, does anyone want to admit to they're getting away with it? Does anyone see it? Does anyone want to come to grips with it and admit to it? No one wants to entertain that idea. No one even wants to talk about it. Okay, fine. Well, then they're going to keep getting away with it. The prime directive is great out front in daylight, but in the shadows, you can find any number of ways of circumventing the prime directive any way you want. And if you're not being caught red-handed, you're going to get away with it. So that's also something to consider too, that the onus is on us, going back to your question in terms of rounding out like where we're supposed to be right now. The onus is on us to realize we have to stop constantly looking for the boogeyman in the closet or the bad guy, the shadows, stop looking for external things to blame everything on, and start looking in the mirror and taking stock of yourself and the part that you play. Because here's what gets me into trouble a lot. I tell people 50% of the blame, and at least that much, rests at your doorstep. The other 50%, sure, that's from those idiots who put it upon you. But at this point, you're aware of it. You watch shows like Dr. G and others, okay? Office Hours and several other myriad of shows. Well, now you can't say you didn't know. Now you're confronted with it. Now you got to go look in the mirror and have a serious, I don't know, call it a come to Jesus moment or something like that. And a bit of a wake up call of your own. Maybe you need to just sit down somewhere and have a good cry to get it out of your system. But whatever it is, other people would be doing cartwheels. The point is once you're waking up to that, you also need to embrace the fact that 50% of the blame has always rested at your doorstep. And this is the part that we're not willing to deal with. We have been socially conditioned to blame the other, or it's their fault. It's the nebulous them, the infamous them. Whoever them are, that's the enemy. Well, define them. Well, it's them over there. Who? Define them. Narrow it down. Oh, you can't? Okay, well then where did you get that idea from? Where did you get the idea from that there's dark corners out to get you, or there's a boogeyman in the closet? Or why do you think demons, and this is where demonology irks me, because they're always going the wrong way with the religious side of it. Why do you think demons, when they're characterized and depicted, they all look like bipedal Komodo dragons? In other words, reptilians. Okay? They operate on a frequency to manipulate you. This is why they can operate like they're walking between the raindrops. The good guys do it too, but the bad guys excel at it as an art. And this is how you get that concept of I'm possessed by a demon. And you start, doing all sorts of strange things because that came into your life. And the point is, why did we allow this to get this far? It's because we allowed ourselves to forget. Now, I'm not canvassing things. Obviously, there were things happening in the past that terrified the living hell out of us to the point where we're thinking, how do I protect my family? How do I protect my children? Because that's the first hurdle to get over too. Any mother or father coming into this for the first time is going to think, what about my children? I can't protect them. Well, the military can't protect you. That's a reality you're just going to have to come to terms with. And then you're going to have to admit to the fact, well, okay, fine. I can't protect myself from any of this. All I can do is focus on myself and admit to the fact that I'm 50% to blame for what's happening on the planet right now. What am I going to do about that in my community, in my immediate community, to make it better? You don't have to tear off huge chunks of big things in politics and economics. You just need to focus on the fact that it's grassroots from the ground up. It starts with you and your community and your family. Native Americans know this. They have always had that philosophy of structure where first is the individual. That comes first. Then there's your immediate family. That comes next. Then there's the clan you belong to, the community. Then there's multiple communities, which they call a moiety. And then there's the nation or the tribe. Okay, all of the people together, or in this case, a family of man. All right. So it's not something overwhelming. And by moving towards that at the community level, which we see happening already, I'm not talking about anything new. This is going on already. You can work it up to the higher levels to the point where it's a tidal wave that can't be stopped. And that's the thing that sends the message to the galactic community. They're ready. But it's got to start with you as the individual first, because we are all psychologically damaged in one way or the other. And we need to come to terms with that because of the way our history has been mangled and warped and then weaponized against us. to enslave us, when it's supposed to be the liberating, emancipating thing that wakes us up. So embrace the fact that we are them and they are us. Our ancestors are us today. And maybe even literally, because here's the other reality that we should be focusing on, and that's those ancient aliens, those ancient astronauts. When we start, and we generations to come, I should say, when our grandchildren and great grandchildren start coming face to face with official first contact, I have a bet on the table that what they're going to come face to face with is the very thing that started their bloodline in the first place with those ancient aliens. It's going to be the same entity because they have a longevity that we would misinterpret as immortality. So the one who started your bloodline is the one you're going to confront in official first contact. And that's going to actually blow all of our religious beliefs out of the water once we realize that.
Okay. Well, I already know who I want. Previous life I was my grandmother, so it's just just you're like how your
reincarnation is a powerful role in that.
My grandmother died when my mother was 7, so I came 11 years later when she was 18, and I came back through.
I think one of my nieces is the reincarnation of my mother. Mm-hmm. I really do. My niece is Emily, and when she was first born, that was like around 2007. My mom had already passed away in 2005. When I held her when she was a baby, I immediately smelled my mother on her. I was like, this is mom's smell. This is mom. This is her way of saying it. Yeah. And none of my other nieces had that. That was just her. I was like, well, how is that going to happen unless you consider that possibly this is mom reincarnated in one of her nieces? Yeah.
He come back. Yeah.
And I could see that happening with the way my mom was. She was the one that would always have those open conversations with me about aliens in the Bible when I was a kid. Yeah, I had that kind of mom. Okay. So I wish everyone had that kind of mom, but I was
my children and grandchildren have that kind of mom, but they,
yes,
they think I'm crazy, but they still have that kind of mom.
Yeah, I know. And I think in a lot of ways that propelled me forward too, by having that stable foundation with my parents in the family. But you mentioned, since you brought up reincarnation.
Yeah, soul traps.
Yes. Consider this. Reincarnation knows how to play the game too, in terms of the Moorish Legacy, and Mother Earth knows how to play poker with a straight face. So all those people from the past, dark-skinned people, who were prophets or mystics or just everyday people, they're being reincarnated now in a lot of ways, in many cases, as looking like me. So I will mess with the audience when I'm giving a lecture and said, do you think I always looked like this? I used to look like you in a past life. And that's why I came back like this, because that's Mother Earth's way of having the last laugh. So all these white people walking around, they would be shocked to realize that they were dark-skinned, okay? Aborigine, Native American, Native African, Native Asian or Arabian. And the things going on today with people finding out about their genetic gene pool around the planet, where they come from, where their ancestry comes from, is amazing. I mean, I have one ancestor in my tree from Africa who went straight to Europe and nowhere else. So I'm just vanilla all the way through, but nothing impressive there. But Linda, who's Cuban, her lineage goes all over the planet, even to the point of reaching out to the middle of the Pacific of Rapa Nui, Easter Island. So her genetic bloodline is all over the map. And that, to me, is an amazing reality of how the ancient Moors were everywhere. So because they were the master mariners.
Right.
Think how fast we.
It's funny how they took the master the terminology of the master mariners and created maritime law.
Oh yeah, I know.
The very people who started. But we're back. We're back. We're coming back. We're coming back.
Coming back. Yes.
We're back. Listen, we got to do this again. We got to come back and do a part 4 or whatever would be a part 4. So, but thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you for having me on. Yes.
For being here and for sharing so much. This was I like chatting with people. Like I like chatting with old friends, and I'm not calling you old, but friends I've known for a while, so that we could.
I'm getting there.
Yeah, keep going. But it's wonderful, and I believe from what I see, as in the chat, that most people, for the most part, this was a very enlightening conversation. So I appreciate you. Cynthia was in there. She said good night about 10 minutes ago.
Oh, I missed her. I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah. I think she's under what is it? I forgot what I should know her name as she puts it in there. Aset.
Oh, yes, that is her name. Yeah.
Right. She was there. So I'm going to see her on Friday. She'll be here with me in Delaware for like a little over a week or more. So we have to get some house and minds business and stuff taken care of. So I'm looking forward to spending some quality time with her.
Very nice. Yeah. If you want to see what shenanigans I'm up to, just go to my website, ufoteacher.com.
Somebody said something about I'm not sure if they were talking they asked if your books are available on Amazon.
They are. You can go to the website ufoteacher.com and purchase.
Well, somebody said they said the website was blocked. When did I see that? It said something.
Oh, if there's an ad block that pops up, just close it out. It happens because we have Linda and I have an affiliate program with our business, and sometimes that pops up. Just close it out. Just go back to the website. It happens to everybody.
Oh well,
so,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because it's in the description.
Yeah.
The show description.
Okay. Yeah. I apologize for that, family. It's annoying to me too. It happens to me. So
all right.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for tuning in and for the most part being very, very good, because I only had to say something to one. And what I like is when you tell somebody something once and they complied. So that was good.
Yeah. I'm glad everybody was here in the chat too. Thank you for being here tonight.
That was awesome. Really, 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 really appreciate it. And listen, y'all, next week I'll be back. I've been doing regular Tuesday. So before y'all go, next Tuesday, Chief Pontiac, aka Rod Hayes, aka Chief Pontiac, is gonna be here. And I think it's called, you know what? Here's how we do it. He's going to be here, and it's called, it's all about systems. So, make sure y'all, you tune in next Tuesday at 8. And also visit my website down here. Check out Vital Health. And we'll see you on the flip side. How about that? All right, again. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Richard. And give Linda my love. Tell her I say thank you. Letting us borrow you for a couple hours.
Have a good night. Bye-bye.
All right. Have a good night.
The G. Really? Oh shit.
Yeah, that's me.
The G. Really? Oh shit.
Yeah, that's me.
Dr. 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 G. Really? Oh shit.
Yeah, that's me.